I was wondering, how do you tag context? Because from a conversational point of view, omnichannel differs from conversational omnichannel because we don't design sentences, we design dialogues and conversations. So as conversation designers, we're not very much into linear or classical content, and therefore a classical omnichannel technology architecture is not very helpful. So I was wondering how you deal with context.
Beautiful. That's a perfect transition to Chris. Chris, I'd love to tap you to answer that question that Coraline has so eloquently asked, better than I could, which is, you know, this one about accruing contextual relationships between the content objects and the data that surround.
To build off kind of Aaron and Michael's comments, it really starts fundamentally with really intelligent content and well-designed authoring system. In other words, creating this structured semantic content, right, represented in semantic web standards such as RDF, right, content graphs. To do that, and then to get to personalization requires a distributed systems architecture where there's this common data aggregation layer across the enterprise where personalization systems can query and understand the intelligent content from various content graphs, and then take other data such as user data or signals to the recommendation models, and then shape and transform that content desired through the personalization model to that endpoint for consumption or making it available for integrators.
And Chris, how are those semantics stored? Because what I think for folks that don't differentiate between the content object and the semantics that tag them, I really want to make sure everybody on this call ends up understanding that semantics have to be decoupled from content objects in some way. And maybe Chris, you can talk about what that means. Why are semantics decoupled?
Semantics are decoupled from the content object, right? Because fundamentally, right, the content needs to be machine readable, right, or understood by a machine, which is slightly separate from the CMS kind of authoring interfaces that most authors think of from a content object perspective. In that case, Aaron, do you want to jump off on this?
Sure. I think maybe it's time to use the O word here, and in terms of advanced omnichannel technology, and that really is ontology or some formal description of the relationships between objects, right? And by objects, I mean things, and this kind of then addresses to a certain extent Coraline's point, which is how do you represent the semantics of a fragment? And it's by defining the relationship between the bits that it relates to, right? So simply by saying article has publication date, you've established some semantics. It's no longer just a table, article, publication date. Publication date actually means something. That's a relation that is channel and presentation layer agnostic, right? It lies beneath even the structured content elements, which is a logical representation. So for us at EA, and we'll hear this during our talk tomorrow, we actually start in terms of content modeling, not with the logical model, the content model, but with a conceptual model where those relationships are defined and each of the elements are defined, because then you can go on to build logical models from that, and any number of logical models for different endpoints without changing the underlying semantics of the elements and their relations between them. And sorry, I've just realized I've used the O word without giving a definition. An ontology provides a common language for your enterprise and for your content operations. It establishes those definitions and that common language through formal description of the things in your ecosystem and the relations between them. And that becomes really, in terms of what Michael was talking about, I was thinking all this time of data virtualization, right? Because having an ontology allows you to take data that resides in different repositories, user data, semantic data about taxonomies, data about how your content is structured, and combine these through that common language, right? That you can still have data that resides in place, let's say about your users, but isn't constructed in the same way that your content is. But you can map that so that you're speaking in that virtualized environment a common language, and then you can query it as if it's one thing, right? That's pretty, to be clear, that's fairly sophisticated architecture, but I think ultimately some flavor of this is where enterprise content architecture is going, because you need that flexibility to be able to combine data from different sources, but treat it as a singular object so that you can make use of it, especially for personalization and recommendation, not to mention analytics. But if you want to combine a number of content elements with some information about a user, then you need to know the semantics of that user. What is the meaning of the relationships you're defining there? What's the meaning of these different content elements that I have? And to be able to query that as a single query and say, oh, I'm going to construct this content object with these particular instances of these elements because that's what is most suitable for that user.
And Aaron, I appreciate that really broad overview. The ontology word is a word that often derails folks, especially marketers who are used to tagging systems. We often talk about it, the core content model and the core semantic model, which is the structural representation, the semantic representation. Sometimes those can start with very, very simple tag sets and controlled vocabularies, and then it matures into more formal ontologies that can be queried independent of the content and then attributed to content over time. Michael, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this idea of the relationship that Aaron was bringing up between the formal ontology and things that marketers know, because you're in marketing now, as tags, and how that gets related to the content, especially within the supply chain. You've described at IBM with multiple sources that all have to end up with integrated set of semantics downstream, right? Within what you were calling the fragment database. So the semantics basically have to be, accrued and contained by the time we get into that queried state, where it has to be then available to, as Coraline's talking about, these chatbot interactions. So the micro content unit has to have a semantic handle on it in order to be referenced in a semantic way by a chatbot application or an intelligent agent of some kind.
So I want to start just by going back to the first thing you said about sort of content objects being separated from semantics. And depending upon, and this also feeds into the question, depending on how you define content object, we're absolutely baking semantics into the object itself and then separating the object from the presentation layer. Let's say you've got 30 fields that are part of a case study. 25 of those go into the web page. A different 25 go into the PDF. 5 of them go into one preview context. A different 5 go into another preview context. But it's still the same 30 elements in that object. And so that's sort of our that's sort of our starting point. And
the elements come from a common source, right? They come from a common list or whether it's the ontology or whether it's a taxonomy. It's they're not being tagged different things. The semantics are being baked in, but baked in from a common reference. They're
being baked in by the template. So if you fill in, this is a testimonial from, sort of there might be structure to that testimony. Here's the actual quote. Here's the actual name of the person who gave the quote. Here's potentially even more detail, like the particular topic or business benefit that this is going to support, or the particular product that it's relevant to within a case study that potentially covers multiples. But that's all baked into the template and at authoring time, and then those values are, and this is the way we're doing it. The ontology is certainly capable of much richer and more deeply sort of intertwined descriptions. What we're doing with it currently is using metadata to relate actual content instances. So we can say if two things are tagged with the same value, we can relate them. And then using the ontology to walk the tree and say, okay, this is a case study tagged with subtopic X. And if we need them to go up to a broader context, where is the overview page for parent topic Y? And we're going to find that parent relationship crossing content types by using the ontology map of topic to topic relationships. And that gets into more ontology, but the instance stuff is all happening just with metadata that very simply sort of, ties a page or a component of a page to a particular sort of subject or purpose. And there is no taxonomy of the fields in an object other than it just being sort of semantic labels within the template that allow us to query them reliably. And there may be some common, like, there's always a title field, there's always a description field, that kind of commonality, but that's very, sort of straightforward. We're setting up an object in a predictable way. There's going to be a relationship with general sort of common elements versus specific elements. And I also just want to quickly speak back to Coraline's question, sort of original question about sort of how that kind of metadata can actually inform a chat experience, if I got that accurately. And so this is going back to a conversation I had sort of a while back. I haven't interfaced with it with our chatbot team recently, but one of their main challenges is connecting people with the right content that can actually, sort of answer the question they have or supply them with the, sort of the decision material to sort of progress to another stage. And answering that question is usually done through a particular asset or a particular page. And so if the way I'm thinking of it is, for that kind of scenario, we're effectively using the chat interface to accumulate knowledge about the user's need that we can then match against metadata in our content database, and then provide them with some suggestions. Like, and that's a very simple scenario, but and there are situations where we match them with a particular element from the asset. Like here, we think we can source the specific answer from within, say, a how-to or an explanation when it's a specific section or a specific answer within a larger document. But most of the time, we're returning the whole page or the whole asset.
To listen in on the full Roundtable conversation and others, plus get access to more exclusive insight about omnichannel customer experiences, join the content order for free at simpleA.com.